Good morning now. My name's Adam Stowe. I'm in the Department of Biology, where I run the Masters of Conservation Biology. Clearly I've got a very keen interest in biology and a very keen interest in conservation. And I teach both into the undergraduate curriculum and the postgraduate curriculum within the department. One of my primary research areas is the use of genetic tools to understand the consequences of human impacts on the environment. So that's my primary research area. I run the Conservation Genetics Lab, along with directing the Masters of Conservation Biology. So very pleased to be able to talk to you today about that program. And Peter.
Hi, good morning everyone. So Peter Davies is my name. So I look after the Masters of Sustainable Development, but also in the department that I work, which is the Earth and Environmental Sciences. We have the Masters of Environment. And I guess in my background comes from about 20 years working as an environmental and sustainability professional, and then about sort of 8 years ago I sort of pivoted back into academia, really to try and get that basis of evidence-based decision making. And again, that's one of the real foundations that we have as part of our curriculum, both in the undergraduate and particularly the postgraduate space in our degree programs. So, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go, but Adam, tell me a little bit about the conservation program.
Yeah, glad to. So, like all conservation biologists, we're very concerned about the rapid loss of biodiversity. In fact, as you well know, and many of us will know, that we're currently during a period that's often referred to as the Anthropocene. And we're going through the sixth major extinction spasm that the Earth's seen. So this is a critical period because not only does nature have, in my view, an intrinsic value, it also provides critical ecosystem services. And in order for health and well-being, not only of the environment but for humans, we need to learn a whole bunch of aspects of biodiversity, and we also need to develop skills to manage the environment in order to prevent those losses of biodiversity. And that's essentially what this program's about. Conservation biology is a multidisciplinary activity, and we teach a range of different skills and disciplines to develop future conservation biologists and practitioners in this area.
Yeah. Thanks, Adam. And I guess that theme of multidisciplinarity is, again, it's one of those central ideas that are actually core to the three masters programs that we're talking about today, whether it's in ecology, in environment and sustainable development. And I guess principally because of the complexity of problems that we're facing nowadays. That if we wind the clock back 30 years, we could think about sort of binary problem solutions. But where we are at the moment is this really interesting time, and it's a great time in some ways to be alive and importantly to study, because there's so much that we are learning, and as a consequence of that learning, there's so much we still don't know. And I guess particularly in the interdisciplinary space, joining the dots between the ecologists, between the economists, between the environmental scientists, between the social scientists. And again, that interdisciplinary focus is certainly a core part of the environment program that we teach, like the ecology, but particularly as we transition to the Masters of Sustainable Development, which is really, furthering that spectrum of interdisciplinary research and teaching.
Yeah. So I guess to develop that theme of multidisciplinary skills even further, in terms of the practice of conservation, and teaching those skills. And there's a number of hands-on units that I know the Masters units in Environment have, and also plenty of the units within the Masters of Conservation Biology. And I see that as a particularly strong point of the Masters programs that we're talking about, is that we actually have hands-on experience with real conservation practitioners.
Yeah. And I think it's often students will ask the question, why study at Macquarie? And I guess there's lots of reasons for that, and we'll talk about some of those. But principally, some of the major reasons is the notion of authentic learning, field-based hands-on learning. So yes, there's some stuff in the classroom, and that's where some of the core theory is taught, but many of our units get you outside. In our environment program, we send you down to Jervis Bay for a bit over a week, beautiful south coast, collecting information, collecting data on the natural and the human systems, and pulling all that together. And there's a myriad of other courses that have those, whether it's their one-day field trip or multiple days.
Yeah, and I guess it's also worth highlighting that collectively we have world leaders in a whole range of different disciplines that are related to the environment and conservation biology, and we draw upon that. So we can set up. We've got units that set up internships or research projects that can be carried out with world leaders in marine science, world leaders in terrestrial ecology. So I think this is another real strength of the programs that we're talking about.
Yeah, and I guess some of the other areas, and there's a phrase called the gown to town, or that relationship between academia and business. And certainly one of the things that we try to do, embedding in our units and our assessment tasks, is not to give you hypotheticals. It's to go out to industry and say, what are the questions that you have? And let's get our students to actually think about real world problems. And certainly one of the foundation, one of the core units in the Masters of Sustainable Development is doing a consultancy project in small groups and going to a business, whether it's an NGO, whether it's a private sector business or a government business entity, and ask them what's their problem, what's their question, and they've got a semester to answer that. And so it is that deep relationship.
That's a very good point. Quite often academic practice isn't translated into a way that's sort of tangible for real practitioners to utilise, and I think that emphasis is a great strength of the programs as well.
I think I guess one of the other questions that will frequently come up is, what are my career opportunities when I finish? And I was looking at some data yesterday, and I'll just go to my notes to make sure I've got the right statistics. So in 2016, a bit over 70% of our students went to full-time employment soon after. The 2019 data, it was 89%. And so we're seeing this increasing trajectory of employability, but I think that also speaks to the demand of practitioners with these types of qualifications.
Absolutely, and I know you've had similar experiences, but when you have students embedded with industry and carrying out internships or research programs with industry, they develop those connections that really facilitate their future employment. And we've had students end up with all sorts of government conservation agencies and non-government conservation agencies, and those connections have been developed actually as part of the program.
Yeah, and I think one of the other interesting areas, we quite frequently have students that enter the Coursework program and might do their sort of 1.5, 2-year master's program, and some of them get this appetite where they actually want to do I guess, a vertical deeper dive into some subject matter, and typically they can then go into a research pathway. And it's not as though we're selling the research pathway, but these are opportunities that the coursework program can also provide as students start to, I guess, discover both the breadth and the depth of the fields and disciplines.
Yeah, so there's a breadth of opportunity, and exactly, you know, if you're carrying out a unit and you decide that research is really something that you're passionate about, then there's the flexibility to allow that to happen.
And so, I guess some of the more practical questions often will arise when a class is held. What's the structure? What's the format? So, certainly in the Masters of Environment, Masters of Sustainable Development, many of our units are evening, typically around the 6 to 9. Some are block mode, full day, infrequent full day affairs, and some are also offering in sort of that day mode. What then becomes interesting in our now COVID world of how more online teaching is being undertaken, and certainly some of the units that we're taking this semester are fully or almost fully online, and so we can see that some changes which for many students offers that great flexibility, particularly those who are working full time.
Yeah. So I think this hybrid model of teaching so far is actually working quite well. So we've developed the online capacity to sort of adapt, you know, with these recent changes. So so far, student feedback's been very positive.
Yeah. And some of the other questions that will often arise is, you know, who does these degrees? Am I too old? And so the age profile of the students that I've been teaching ranges from early 20s, straight from their undergraduate, through to I've had some 70-year-olds who are really just trying to, you know, discover things in their life. But, you know, if you try to describe the typical student, there's probably typical types of students. There's the younger, recent graduates, limited experience. There's sort of the early mid-career, recognising that they've actually got to change and upskill because they're realising the fast pace of change. And then often you'll have some of the more mature age, and I don't wish to define mature age for various reasons, as they're starting to see, well, I actually want to know more about the world and how the world works.
Yeah. I would say that in the Masters of Conservation Biology, we've got roughly a third of the students actually being practitioners in conservation. So they're working the field, they're upskilling, and the remainder of those that see the opportunities, the career opportunities we've already talked about, and are pursuing the programs for those reasons.
And that often leads to the question of how much experience, or what's my pre-qualification. So in our degrees, they range from a 2-year degree to a 1.5 degree to about and some can actually go through their masters with one year, and that will depend on, I guess, the relevance of their undergraduate studies, but also a combination of where they've been working.
Yeah. So we can certainly look at equivalencies, equivalent work experience, and how that will relate to the enrolment process.
Yeah. Are there? I'm just looking at the list here in terms of questions that are coming up, and one of the questions which we might have touched on, which is about linking with industry leaders and future employers. So one of the things that we certainly try to do in our programs is have our guest lecturers come in, typically from industry, from people who we know, who we've worked with, and who we also know carry this sort of that gravitas or reputation. And they're frequently really happy to come and talk to our students, and sometimes we'll have seminar series where we'll have groups of or panels of these experts. And that also to me as a teacher, it actually gives the students this first-hand experience to go and talk to these future employers, talk to these leaders, and if they've got business cards or they're swapping their contact details. And so there are mechanisms, I guess, through which we try to link the employability pathway. So it's not just here's your degree, off you go. So there was a question from, I can't quite catch their name, what kinds of career, from Edward, will the Masters of Environment, Masters of and Sustainable Development help me pursue? So there's a whole range of career areas, and I guess that didn't quite answer your question, but most organisations, most government organisations will have an environment section or even department nowadays, and certainly I see these shifts because when I graduated, the environment department was often one person, and now it's a whole team, and we're also seeing new changes and new positions. So many organisations are having resilience officers that are trying to think about the complexities of their business activities and its relationship to their immediate environment, their customers, and so forth.
So we've got a question here. Are there multiple entry points? Yes, there are multiple entry points, and it relates to the mix of your academic background and your work experience. Yes, you can enter at a 1.5 or 2 year period, depending on which subjects you've done. So at a most basic level, you need to have done an undergraduate degree with a couple of units in biology or equivalent work experience. One of the things that we're very keen to do is ensure that if you do come in, you've got the requisite background knowledge, and we do offer a number of foundation units that help build up those skills and knowledge before you commence into the more complex units later on.
And there's a question here from Michael as well. What's the difference between the Masters of Environment and the Masters of Sustainable Development? And so and again, Michael, that's a quite frequent question. And typically it relates to, well, as a starting point, those two degrees have a high degree of similarity. And where they separate is really when the students are looking at the subject matter. So the sustainable development students will look at specific sustainable development theories, will look at communication and education focus, will look at and have opportunities to do more interdisciplinary based studies, whether it's in business and finance, in communications, and certainly in the ecology space. With the environment masters, so it's a little bit more focused on what I'd traditionally talk about, the natural environment, which is certainly picking up on the conservation themes, but less, slightly less. If you can think about ripples in a pool, the sustainable development ripple is a little bit further out in terms of the breadth of the subject matter that you'd study, whereas the environment masters is a little bit closer.
Okay, so we've got a COVID-related question, of course, and the question relates to how COVID might have impacted on teaching. Well, there is there of course is an impact of COVID, but it's changing very rapidly the extent to which the impact is being felt. But we're always coming up with alternatives. So if we're talking about field-based work that is, say, interstate, if that's not possible, then we've got a range of very good options that can be carried out. You mentioned Jervis Bay, and there's a range of options that can be carried out in New South Wales. Even worst case scenarios, there's a number of great experiences that you can have, for example, embedded in citizen science programs that are run online. So even worst case scenario of a lockdown, we can still provide enriching learning experiences.
Yeah, and some other, I guess to finish with the COVID. So there's been this sort of shift, but with some of our students actually can't come to class. And so we've been, thinking about how do we do more fully online options, but certainly from the way we're teaching, we're having to think very hard and also very fast. As to what's going to happen in 2021, we're not that talented to predict the future. But certainly we can see this, I guess, fundamental change in the way our teaching's being delivered and also thought about, much more than the contemporary weekly classroom and field excursion model.
And I know we've talked about this before, but it's actually been quite a creative process to sort of meet these challenges. And I think there have been a number of very positive developments within the curriculum and thinking about how to get around the challenges of the pandemic. So it's not all doom and gloom.
Yeah. There was another question here from Michael. Where else can you get a job other than government and academia? Well, heaps of places. So one of our really early graduates who went through the program is the sustainability manager for IBM. We've got other people who work in the aviation and the transport industry in the private sector. There's a myriad of consultants that are out there offering services, whether it's educating and informing businesses, whether it's developing online games, the gamification of decision making, through to quite specific advice and consultancy advice. And so a lot of our graduates end up in consulting firms, providing those services, often either to government or to their own businesses. Similar
experience. I'd also add that there's a number of non-government conservation agencies, Bush Heritage, Australian Wildlife Conservancy, these sorts of organisations that have employed quite a few of our graduates over the years.
And I see a question from Edward. Will the qualification be recognised overseas? And the answer is absolutely. And so much so that we actually get quite a significant number of our students from overseas coming to do our degrees. And that provides, as a teacher, it provides this wonderful richness of examples. And even last night, on Thursday night, I was talking about sustainable cities in one of my units. And I was having a discussion of Bogota versus Jakarta. And so, and there were students there that could provide that granular level insights, which the rest of the class could really gain from. So you have this lovely mix of domestic versus the international.
Yes, and I think that feeds into something we were discussing a little bit earlier in that, in terms of networking, the mix of domestic and international students provides opportunities globally because you develop those strong international networks.
Yeah, and I guess that the international part is, when I think about the value proposition of studying, and particularly the field-based focus study and group activities that we do in our degrees, what I find really rewarding when I'm talking to students at the end of their degree programs, that they actually make lifelong friends. And they can be scattered all around the world because they've done multi-day field trips together, they've done group assignments over the course of a year and a half, 2 years, and those networks, even within the student cohort, then can create this, really wonderful community of practitioners.
Absolutely, and as a teacher into those units, it's you develop those lifelong friendships with students as well, which is very rewarding. It's a very rewarding part of the job.
So there's a question, a mystery question about class size. So class sizes will often depend on the unit itself and the activities that we're doing. And so we can talk about, I'll talk about averages, but averages hides a lot of things. So within the units, some of our units might have 100, some of our units might have 20. But typically a class in the tutorial-based discussion groups, we try and think about this sort of magic number, Goldilocks number if you like, somewhere around 30 plus or minus bits around that, so we can get that rich discussion going. And we know there's lots of good research and lots of good teaching assessments that groups of 7 really work well groups of 6 and 7, groups of 15 don't, groups of 3 don't. And so sometimes it's not just the class size, but it's the configuration of the discussions that we have within the class and the groups that we do.
I guess, just following on from that and the sorts of experiences that students have, we're a very collegial bunch in the environment and biology, and we really encourage our students to become part of the community, and there are regular seminars and regular get-togethers that we strongly encourage all the students to come along and participate in. So doing a master's course here in biology or the environment, you really do become part of the broader community.
Yeah, and that community, certainly within the discipline of, I guess, the sciences, but also, I guess, in the social sciences, be they the geographies, be they the law, be they the economics and accounting areas. And so it does fall back to this interdisciplinary, and there's some great networks and teachers across the university campus that give and share a lot of their expertise into our programs.
I guess just sort of round that off, the campus itself. If you haven't visited Macquarie University, the campus itself is beautiful. It's not a concrete jungle. It's surrounded by forest. You've got the Lane Cove National Park there. You close by an ecology reserve. There's even an endangered plant community on campus. So it's a very green campus, and it's a beautiful place to study. Yeah,
and so those of you who are thinking about studying, so there's a metro right at the door. There's the beautiful campus grounds, but we're also within the Macquarie Park District, which is one of the fastest growing sort of urban redevelopment areas. And so there are these really interesting examples of both teaching and practice that you can see and that we use in our teaching to say, well, what are these impacts that are having on the environment, but more importantly, how are we going to manage them? And they're the skills and they're the insights that you'd be gaining through your programs. Great. Adam, anything?
No, I think that just about covers it from my end.
Yeah. And if you have any other questions, keep posting the questions online. Thank you so much for those who did post questions. I think there's a great team of our colleagues sort of somewhere in the world answering those questions. But again, you can also just post the questions generally to the university, and no doubt they'll end up on our desks for our thought. So thank you for listening.
Thank you.